Okay, so we've pretty much assumed for about a year now that Republican governance, both in terms of the governors, but then also the effect of the president, led to really bad outcomes when it came to the pandemic. But actual scientific analysis of differences in outcomes for the pandemic across areas controlled by Republicans versus Democrats, we haven't had a ton of that. We have a bit more now. So here is what has been found in this new study. COVID-19 case and death rates in states with Republican governors have been markedly higher than those with Democratic leaders for much of the pandemic, suggesting decisions like lifting stay-at-home orders and declining to issue mask mandates likely resulted in higher COVID-19 metrics as GOP governors now go even further to rescind public health measures. Now, all of this seems common sense, doesn't mean it would work out that way, but it looks like it in fact did. So researchers found that while COVID-19 incidence and death rates were initially higher in Democratic-led states, some of the earliest epicenters of the pandemic were states like New York and New Jersey, Republican states soon overtook them and their rates remained higher through December. GOP states started having more cases per 100,000 people than Democratic ones starting June 3rd, reaching a maximum of 1.77 times more cases on June 28th. Republican-led states' COVID-19 death rates overtook Democratic states on July 4th, how patriotic, reaching up to 1.8 times as many deaths on August 5th, and they had a higher test positivity rate starting May 30th that peaked at 1.7 times higher on June 23rd. So look, we talk in general terms across a lot of different issue areas about the difference between having Democrats in charge and having Republicans in charge. It is not often that you can so directly quantify the difference there, and understand that the difference that's being demonstrated there is cases which can result in lifelong issues, even if you survive with COVID, let alone the fact that so many more people died, and not magically, not mysteriously, very reasonably, because people weren't encouraged to wear masks, they weren't required to, things were kept open. When there were lockdowns, they were opened prematurely. We knew at the time that that would lead to more deaths, and this study is showing that it did. And that's very easy to see the trends here.
Yeah. It's so weird that what it comes down to for me is that original instinct when you hear something. Hopefully the original instinct when you hear something that you have is to question it. But the other thing I hope is that what you use to question the information being given to you is based in reality. And I think that's where the two parties typically diverge. Like Democrat or people on the left question it in line with the scientific method. They question what's given to them, saying, does this go in connection with the things that have been tangibly proven to me over time, using precedent and fact. But what I find too often from these Republican governors is what benefits them in this weird rhetorical war that they're always in. And so they always initially ask questions based on whether this will get them more votes relative to what the discussion is. And so this strange defiance is good in some instances when people are trying to take your rights away, when folks are trying to quash your ability to exercise the First Amendment in a very real way, then it is good to question those things. But when I look at all this and all my skeptical friends who are on the right side of on the right, they come back and I look at them and say, it just makes more sense to me to cover your mouth with an airborne illness that is, the little water droplets coming out of your mouth. I feel like we should cover that. And then if I'm not vaccinated, I should probably stay away from people. That is the guiding premise behind all of this. And it's rejected because of this weird war that the right always feels like it's in. And it's proven to be absolutely detached from reality in every single day in other respects. So like we talked about earlier in the show, when they're reacting to the most boring Biden speech of all time, as though it's a demagogue shouting from a pulpit to a crowd of throngs of people who must execute the North Korean dance or die. Like that's not what's happening here. And that's what's so frustrating about it to me.
But I think you're totally right. It is this always at war with everyone mode. It's like Littlefinger, but for an entire political ideology. sometimes it's just a distraction that provides a political opportunity cost. If millions and millions of people are convinced by right-wing media to be focused more on Dr. Seuss than COVID aid or the minimum wage, then that sucks. But when they think they're fighting a war on masks that doesn't have to exist, but that because they opt into this war, there are casualties as in a real war, potentially hundreds of thousands of people, then that's like the worst example of that. You could have just relaxed and not been crazy, and a lot of people would be alive. And it's not just them, of course. Mostly it's right wingers that were convinced to take down their guard. The right wing that spends all of the rest of their political time believing that you need to fortify your home and have a million weapons and all that, were convinced to lay down all of the defenses, willingly contracting and dying from COVID, but also taking some other people with them that in theory might have been trying to be responsible, but they're surrounded by tons of people that are not. So that's
and you just wish this was just a Dr. Seuss thing, but it's not. I wish they were just like, some benign craziness, but this is positively, provably like malignant.
Worst, exactly, this might be the worst potential outcome from the weird, sick way that our politics operates.
And it makes sense. I mean, that's what I was talking about for months. Sorry, that's what I was talking about for months and months before all of this happened, when it was like, will Trump lose the election? And my takeaway was like, it just wasn't bad enough for a lot of people. And no matter what it was, no matter how much, race relations in America, civil rights were under siege, it just wasn't economically bad enough for like generic white people. And then it got that way. And that's what turned the tide. And this was something that tangibly affected them, as opposed to like the default gripiness that they always had.
Yeah.
For more political news, breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.